All right, so this is chapter 7. As you can see, I got the same shirt on. I'm just recording with a different background so you can at least differentiate between chapter 6 and chapter 7. Chapter 7, we're discussing theory into practice, right? We'll be discussing several different types of counseling theories, and this is a very broad overview. This isn't meant for you to go out and begin to start practicing, just so you're aware of kind of the differences within counseling theories and counseling styles. So, and I'm going to geek out a little bit because I'm a psych nerd and I love this kind of stuff. So I'm going to give you kind of a broader overview of these different approaches. For those of you who are thinking about speech and language therapy, I think there's some pieces in here for you to learn as well about how to approach interacting with a client and how to have the client think about how they solve problems or how we begin to address problems and issues. Again, it's mostly a psychological frame, so bear with me, but I'm excited to share this piece with you. So here we go. Theory applied to practice. So theory is a great roadmap, right? It's a framework for making sense of the many interactions that occur within the therapeutic relationship. I would also say theory is like a lens, right? A camera lens by which we can begin to use as a tool to understand and identify problems. But we may have a different lens, right? It may be smaller, it may be different. It may have different shapes. It may be a keyhole into which we might see a part, but not the whole. But theories can vary, but they can also help us begin to identify ways in which to solve problems, right? So helpers may emphasize feeling, thinking, and or behaving based upon their theoretical perspective. There are some perspectives that emphasize feeling more than thinking, and some that emphasize thinking more than feeling, and some just like forget all that and they just focus on behaving. Many of them encompass all of the three, but they emphasize one of the three more than the other. So helpers may focus on the past, present, or future as the most productive avenue of exploration. This is another way in which things may vary. I think that's also important to consider the past, present, or future in different parts, but they may spend more time on that. But I think a good theory, and this good working practical theory, considers all of those different pieces, but it may not dwell on all of them in different ways or different amounts of time. So there's 5 contemporary theoretical orientations, and you have the psychodynamic approaches, experiential and relationship-oriented approaches, right? The cognitive behavioral approaches, right? The postmodern approaches, the family systems approaches. Each one of these emphasize something more than the other, and we'll get into some of the emphasis, but I'll pause here to kind of break those down so we have an idea of what we're going into. So the psychodynamic approaches have to do with kind of the interactions of my understanding of how psychology is working within my life and dynamically changing it, actively changing it in my thought process. The experiential and relationship-oriented approaches are really focused in on my current and prior experiences, but also important relationships in my lives, and will emphasize the important relationships in my lives. The cognitive behavioral approaches are about how I think about my life. And if I can change my thinking, then my life and behavior will change. The postmodern approaches, man, they take all types of shapes and forms, but it's really based upon more data sets and more medical information sometimes, at least the current postmodern iteration. The family systems approaches really take into account where I fit within my family structure, how I'm thinking about family in the future, and how these dynamics interact with my family. So I am seen as a part of a family rather than an individual. All right. I hope that makes sense very broadly, but we'll narrow down on these. So the psychoanalytic approach, it takes a whole lot longer. And you're exploring your personality and kind of what built your personality, taking things apart to see, okay, what's kind of been maladaptive, and perhaps putting something in there new so we can develop that. And that takes time. So again, the restructuring of personality is the main goal. And we're dealing with transference and countertransference issues. And when you're experimenting in that regard, that takes time, because first you got to establish the relationship to even transfer anything, and then see what happens when it comes to countertransference. And you have to be careful, because if not, it can be very maladaptive. Many other, as we've talked about in prior lessons, many other theoretical models have developed as reactions against the psychoanalytic approach, right? And so some of the major techniques are maintaining the analytic framework, having a free association, interpretation, dream analysis, analysis of resistance, and analysis of transference. And I'll go back through all of these, right? So maintaining the analytic framework, right? I'm just taking time to be aware, to understand and hear what's happening with the patterns in the stories that people are telling me, or the information that's being given to me. And then we're going to maintain this particular approach. If I'm a Freudian, I'm going to take a look at what Freud's theoretical ideas are about, and I'm going to analyze your experience based upon what Freud has given me. If I'm a Jungian, I'm going to maintain that Jung-based approach based upon Jung. If I'm using Anna Freud's daughter's framework, again, I'm going to add my own spin on it based upon Anna Freud's framework. Next, free association. If I say dog, you tell me something, and eventually a pattern will emerge about the types of things that you freely associate with innocuous vocabulary. Interpretation. How do I interpret people's actions and behaviors in my day-to-day life? What do those things mean to me? And that meaning is what where I'm able to find a place to analyze my own life and maybe begin to work on those things. Dream analysis, right? Dreams can mean everything and mean nothing, but in dream analysis, again, we're looking at patterns that are coming up within dreams. Within your unconscious state are things that you're able to recall as well. That's also a big part of it. So if there is resistance to change, what is it about that resistance? Or what is it about that transference that's occurring that's being brought up? And we're going to analyze that and figure out where that's coming from. Okay, that's the psychoanalytic approach. Again, it takes a long time, but it can produce some results. People are still doing it after many, many years as well. The Adlerian approach, right? Clients are viewed as having more agency and capacity for change than with the psychoanalytic approach, at least on their own, right? They're coming creative, active, and decisional. They can make their own decisions. They can be active in their own change, and they may have some ideas that may help. So it's a partnership rather than kind of, I'm the expert and I'm going to guide you through this process. It's we're going to discover together. So social interest is a sense of identification with humanity, a feeling of belonging, and a concern with bettering society. So we're partnering to help the client become a better steward of society. So Martin Luther King really liked Adler. He would quote him a lot. So inferiority feelings often motivate people to strive for mastery, superiority, and perfection because they want to overcome this sense of inferiority, right? So we focus is on challenging the client's mistaken notions and faulty assumptions about what perfection may means, what superiority, right, may mean, right? And also what their own inferior feelings may be about. So the emphasis is on examining lifestyle and clients functioning in the life task. Again, productive, awesome citizens collaborating to work together to make their lives better with their helper as a client. So encouragement is provided so that clients can develop socially useful goals and things that are more realistic, because sometimes if you're a perfectionist, your goals may not be realistic. So you're working on things that can happen more within your sphere of influence. So a range of techniques are used: cognitive, behavioral, and behavioral may be more like timing things or very observable things, checklist even, and also experiential techniques may be used as well, that you're going through this process that will help you grow and develop. All right, another approach, existential, right? My existence, right? And understanding why I exist. What's the meaning of my existence? How did I get here? So it's based upon the following assumptions. So we define ourselves by our choices, right? And choice is huge in many kind of counseling techniques, but defining ourselves by our choices is important. We have the freedom and responsibility. Both of these go together, right? Man, and that's a deep one today in our society as well. Anxiety is a part of the human condition, right? And if you've studied any part of Buddhism, you understand that that is a huge issue, but it is a part of our condition. So it shouldn't be feared or run away from, but it is an area for us to begin to better understand who we are, right? Death gives significance to our life now because we all are under it and we all are under time. So it gives us all something that is consistent within our lives as well. So the emphasis for the existential approach is on understanding the world of the client, right? Why do I exist? Why am I here? How did I get in this universe, right? And hopefully those things narrow down to, why am I at this particular job at this moment now? Why am I with this partner in my romantic relationships now? Why am I this parent, and what is it about this parenting relationship that is teaching me something to make me a better person that exists in the world and have greater meaning in my life, right? Narrowing down on my existence. People seeking therapy often have led to a restricted existence. So functioning with a limited degree of self-awareness. So expanding creates other possibilities and allows ways to solve and ease anxiety as we think about greater possibilities. People without possibilities are likely to feel themselves impotent, right? Lacking power. And if you lack power, you will try to go out and get more power. So, but if you see that, man, there's infinite possibilities, I don't have to be locked in, you're less anxious. So therapists are not bound either by any prescribed procedures when it comes to an existential approach. Moving on to the next one, a person-centered approach. Right? Clients are at the center of the helping process with person-centered approach. Clients are able to change without a high degree of structure and direction from the therapist. So it's really about that person. Again, to contrast that with what we just talked about with existential approaches are about how that person fits within the universe. That's huge. Here we're narrowing down into the person is the universe, right? And so clients are able to change because they're in charge of that change. So effective helping is based upon the quality of the helping relationship, right? And if the person doesn't feel that helping relationship is really working, they may have a hard time with that. So the emphasis really should be on them. So techniques are secondary to the counselor's attitude. And my attitude needs to be one that I believe the client, right? Going back to something that we talked about in the last, in chapter 6, the expectancy, the efficacy, right? Those two pieces I think are important. All right, moving on to one of my favorites. It's just been one of my favorites because clients who this approach, when they respond to it, they really get into it. And these are usually some creative and exciting clients that I've had. The Gestalt approach. So Gestalt therapy focuses on here and now, experiencing and present awareness. What's in the room? What's with us? And with this growing awareness, clients are able to find within themselves ways in which to seek change. So, but also counselors suggest experiments and emphasize doing rather than talking about it. So there's not a lot of on and on and on. We get in and take a look at the active approaches and do. I and thou language, the approach emphasizes this, right? And really owning your behavior, owning your actions as well. Rather than talking about everybody else, we're going to talk about you and what you can do. Gestalt, I also like that it fills in kind of blanks that may be missing. So if we're telling a discussion or narrative, or we're taking action, sometimes we may be missing some things. So we're looking to figure out what does that missing piece mean? And then how we can fill that in with our actions. Okay, so for example, if I'm working Gestalt, and I did this before in class, but I'll go with this illustration again. And if I have a young person who, and I'm going to shift my background for a second here so y'all can see. Okay, I'm here and I'm pulling up a chair, right? And I'm talking to a client in this chair, like, man, and the client is me, right? I'm taking action rather than just thinking about what I wish would happen. Say, Gamble, you know, you need to go out and you need to teach class in this manner, in that manner. And these are the 5 things you need to do for class today. You need to speak up. You need to listen to your students. You need to ask them more questions. You need to get on that canvas. You need to do X, Y, and Z. I see you, Gamble. That's taking a bit more action and it's more direct than what had been going on before, right? So I wanted y'all to kind of get that sense of what Gestalt can be like, right? Rather than being abstract, it tries to close the gap a bit more with very overt practicing techniques to take that immediately out into the real world, right? Cognitive behavioral approaches, right? They share these attributes: a collaborative therapeutic relationship, focusing on changing faulty cognitions to produce desired changes in affect and behavior, a time-limited and educational treatment. So the difference between the ones that we just talked about and cognitive behavioral approaches as well is that insurance companies really like these. These are a bit more modern, came about in the late 80s, early 90s, but really kind of taken hold in the 2000s. And they focus in on, again, time-limited and educational treatment. So psychoanalysis can cost quite a bit of money. Insurance companies don't want to keep paying a bunch of money for similar results that cognitive behavior approaches can give. So, and that's really some of the changes, but, you know, they're more modern. So, you know, people want to, and insurance companies, I should say, want to pay for more of that. So behavioral therapy, the focus on the behavioral approach is on observable behavior, right? And schools really like this as well. So the current determinants of behavior or antecedents or things that trigger behavior, right? The learning experiences to promote change and rigorous assessment and evaluation, right? So if I could see this child's behavior, let me give you an example. If I'm working with a child, right? And we're going to do behavioral therapy. If I could see that when this child gets upset, they like to throw toys. What are the things that are happening right before they throw the toys? And that requires some observation, maybe from a teacher or from a clinician, right? What are the learning experiences to promote change? What are we saying to the child, or what types of follow-up are we giving to the child when they do something that we don't want them to do? Or are we providing other paths or avenues, right? Are we saying, stop it, don't do that? Or are we saying, this is what we want you to do instead? So when you're angry, it's great when you, and we positively reinforce when you pick up your toys. When you're angry, it's great when you come and tell us, right? And we want to reinforce that. We'd rather you rip up this paper than kick over those chairs. Can you rip up this paper for us instead when you're angry, to let us know that you're angry, especially when you're having difficulty using your words, right? We proactively state what we want. What are those learning experiences? And if there aren't any learning experiences to promote change, we need to come up with one. So that takes rigorous assessment and evaluation, whether it's a rating scale given to the parents and the teachers, or sometimes done by the student, or it's ongoing observations that are timed or on a checklist. And then we come together as a team to discuss an overall evaluation to make a judgment about which direction we should go, what goals we should follow. That's behavioral therapy. All right, rational emotive behavioral therapy, right, has to do with the emotional processes. And then what's going to be rational about choosing certain behaviors when the emotions come up, right? So emotional problems are the result of one's beliefs, not events. So no one can make you angry, right? This is a fallacy that many people have, that you made me angry. No, there are sometimes results of my belief about what something's doing, right? So the aim for REBT is to change disturbances in thinking, feeling, and here's what most often people are concerned about, the behaving. But if we want the behavior to change, often we need to change the thinking and the feeling, or at least be aware of what the thinking and the feeling is. So in those moments, we can make choices. So cognitive techniques includes teaching clients coping statements, disrupting faulty beliefs, and dealing with psychoeducation methods, right? So those coping statements are kind of statements that you state in your head again and again. You may state them out loud, or you may kind of run them on a loop to begin to counteract kind of the gut level statements that come out that lead to the behaviors that you don't like. There may be some beliefs that you have that, especially for young people, but I've seen this in adults, where you believe you're not worthy, that you're not good enough, or that you need to be perfect. So the psychoeducation methods sometimes are about really better understanding how to relate and interact with people. I find most kids with behavior problems, they actually don't know how to use other methods of problem solving. So smacking somebody in the face works in the moment, but it doesn't work long-term, right? Especially if you're trying to have a relationship with someone. But if that's all you know and that's all you see, you're going to keep smacking people in the face. All right. Some more on REBT. Emotive techniques include rational emotive imagery, right? And so connecting an image in your mind with an emotion. Humor is a great way to do that. Shame attacking exercises. And it's all right to feel some level of shame, but it's not really good. So how do we attack these things? Because sometimes shame can make us do some pretty dark things in order to avoid shame, right? Role playing is important, similar to Gestalt therapy, but we're role playing, being in a moment that may provoke that same emotion, but coming up with words or behaviors that are different within that same environment. And then unconditional acceptance. And I used to have this really great group that I ran for anger management. And so what we do is the kids would make puppets and the puppets would say things, but we predetermined what they would say because we weren't talking about people's mom or cussing. But the puppets would say some things that were usually triggers for kids who are around 8 to 12 years old, right? And then the kid would stay in a circle and then they'd read out loud these statements about their own worth, or that the fact that it wasn't worth it to get into an argument with a puppet, right? And they, or, you know, somebody who was saying these things, and they'd read that, and that would be the practice, right? So going on to unconditional acceptance, an unconditional acceptance of themselves as worthy of better behavior. So behavior techniques include self-management, strategies, and carrying out homework in daily life, right? So for these young people, they would go home, the ones I had working with the puppets, they would also go home and think about opportunities in which this happened, where they were able to use the same self-talk that they were reading on the wall while other kids were using these puppets to tease them, right? REBT, powerful stuff, right? Cognitive therapy, right? And it's similar with cognitive therapy, but we're really focusing in on the thoughts rather than just the emotions. And we're changing how people think tends to result in changing feeling and behavior. So we're structuring schemas. So a real quick example of what a schema is: when you're about 4 years old, your parents tell you, hey, we're going to the restaurant. You're going to keep your hands to yourself. You're going to sit down. You're going to say please and thank you. And this is how we're going to act at the restaurant. Eventually, a 4-year-old is usually ushered out of the restaurant at some point, but they're developing their schema around restaurant behavior. Some kids develop their schema around church behavior, around school behavior, before and after school behavior. They develop their schema around what it's like to go to grandma and grandpa's house, right? You have, and it's a way of chunking rules and ideas for how to be in a certain space and place, schema, right? So if we have this overall schema about how we're supposed to be in a relationship, how we're supposed to be at school, how we're supposed to be in our other kind of broader relationships at life, at work, on the freeway, when we're driving, right? We develop these schemas. Sometimes if it's led to poor or maladaptive behavior, we need to restructure those schemas. All right. Clients are encouraged to weigh the evidence in support of their beliefs, right? So Dr. Phil, in his better moments, right? I'm not a huge fan of Dr. Phil, but he would say, how's that working for you, right? And he's basically asking for analysis of, so you're doing these things based upon your beliefs, but it's leading to these bad behaviors. Let's weigh that out. How's that working for you? Counselors guide clients to discover the connection between thinking, feeling, and behaving. So I think this way, and therefore it leads to certain feelings that come up within me. And then others behave a certain way with me, but mainly it's how I behave that I'm having this interaction with the world. So thinking, feeling, and behaving, we chop those up with cognitive therapy. We let people begin to make different choices around thinking, feeling, and behaving. Now, reality therapy is an extension of this, but it's kind of a push. You usually have to have a really good relationship with somebody to do reality therapy. And after I've worked with somebody for over 3 months, a minimum 3 months, then I'm able to get into reality therapy. It's active, directive, and didactic, but I have to have a really good relationship with the person because the emphasis is on acting, thinking, feeling, and even physiology. So I might even say, I notice every time we bring up this issue, you stand up and you walk around the room. Something's going on even within your body that's making you upset about this. Sit down. Right? That's reality therapy. And I'm saying sit down because I want you to feel this. Where is this coming from? When every time we bring up your mother or every time we bring up this certain teacher for period number 5, what is that about? Right? And we'll take some time to get into that. Clients assess their current behavior to determine specific ways they may want to change, right? This is a big part of reality therapy, but it's having somebody hold them accountable to, okay, so you want these things, but yet you keep doing this, right? So you want to be healthy, but yet you're smoking 5 packs a day. How's that working for you, right? Or it's not working for you. I would even push that further with reality therapy. That's not working for you, and that's why you're here. Or you're on probation because you committed a crime, but yet you still have the same reactions. What's going on, and how can we change some of your acting based upon your thinking and feeling, and even how you physiologically feel in the moment as well? Because you may have the feelings of emotions, but you also even have some physiology that goes along with this. What if we change some of your thinking, and maybe some of those deeper feelings might change so we can get better actions from you, or actions that you want and you need because you're tired of being arrested? Or one that I would commonly talk about with students, you're tired of going to the principal's office. So let me help you on that. Right. The procedures for reality therapy through WDEP model: wants, needs, and perceptions, direction, evaluation, and planning. WDEP. So our wants, needs, and perceptions, our direction and doing, our evaluation of our total behavior, then we plan and make commitments in relation to that. And reality therapy is not just fun, but it's very, some of the Gestalt to me, we can have fun with, but reality therapy is very exciting in that I'm able to see somebody, sometimes, they've committed crimes, they've gone through some type of gang thing, they've experienced some heavy trauma, but when we really get into the working, their lives are drastically changing. I love reality therapy for that, right? The one that I use the most is solution-focused brief therapy. These techniques focus on the future and how to best solve problems rather than an understanding of the cause of the problems. I don't need to know why, right? So chapter 6, I did a little bit of solution-focused brief therapy as I asked those questions towards the end. The techniques are focused on the future, right? I don't need to know the understanding of the problems. I don't even need to know exactly what your problem is. But it's brief and collaborative in that I'm guiding you through a process. You're giving me back information, or you're giving yourself back this information. And it's based upon the premise that small changes pave the way for bigger changes. If you can understand a small change within your life and your thinking and your processes, then you can understand how to make bigger changes. So yeah, pre-therapy change, right? And going back to expectancy and efficacy, what do I think it may need for change, right? And I have some expectation questions on a scale of 1 to 10. Another question is a miracle question. And I'll ask this question now. What happened if I had the Thanos glove and bam, I snapped something and things were as you wanted them to be? What would be indicators that your life is better? right? That's the miracle question. I mentioned before the scaling questions. The exception question has to do with, are there times when this doesn't happen? You've gone through the same kind of situation, but it doesn't happen. Okay. The homework may be, it's usually to observe. Just observe, you're in the same situation again, kind of step outside of yourself and see, could there be another way to solve this problem? Okay. Summary. Okay. Summary and feedback is, I hear you've said this, this, and this, and this. I've recognized a pattern. Perhaps there might be some other way we could solve things, but after we've gone over the whole summary, right? Those are some of the ideas with solution-focused brief therapy. I'm interested in what you think about, but the last few that we talked about related to cognitive change are really kind of the ones that I see most often in more modern circumstances. Narrative therapy is coming up as something that's pretty exciting. It examines people's stories and the meanings of their stories. Here at the Black Resource Center, we've worked with somebody who takes photos of people, but also listens to their stories and talks about reducing stigma when it comes to mental health. So the stories about stigma help overcome the stigma. So telling that narrative is important. It's based upon the assumption that there is no absolute reality. And clients are invited to view their stories from different perspectives and co-create an alternative life story. Again, that allows for choice and options. So there's overlap with some of the other theories that we talked about, but it's an exciting developing area. Narrative therapy involves identifying how societal standards are internalized by the client in an effort to limit them, right? And the therapist collaborates with the client and avoids predicting, interpreting, or pathologizing, right? I'm not going to put a label on it. I'm not going to tell you what it is it's supposed to be. I'm not even going to go there. And I've found when I've worked in this manner, it allows the client a broader chance to grow, right? And not every client is ready to do narrative therapy, but those that really are wanting to make some change, they've really thought about through their own things. And so my predicting something is going to limit them. So I want them to go and move in that direction. And we can engage in externalizing conversations and conversations about what life could be like once they begin to apply that narrative to new situations. Right? They're developing their own narrative that's counter to or different or just alive and engaged that's different than what had been told that they had to do. Right? The next approach, and we're narrowing down here on some of these approaches here, but the next one is the family systems approach, right? And family therapy involves a conceptual shift from individual dynamics to interaction with the family. So the client's problematic behavior may serve as a function for the family system. In some ways, that person might be allowing the family system to function. And if they stop behaving in a certain manner, they're worried about the family not being able to be, right? So the challenge for the clinician and the client is to find a way in which to allow the family to function without that person still occupying the same type of role or the exact role. Sometimes they need to just completely step out altogether and occupy a very different role. So symptoms stem from family dysfunction, and dysfunctions are often passed across generations, or they may be developed off of a trauma as well. Okay. So this approach tends to be short-term, solution-focused, action-oriented, and present-focused. So most of my work tends to be solution focused in family systems, just based upon how I work. And I'll explain that a little bit more, but let me keep going through this. There's patterns of relationships that are not working well, and those patterns are targeted, right? So it takes some time, I think, to get to know what's going on if you're doing it right. If you're kind of arrogant and assume a lot of things, you can kind of get by, but I think you really need to take the time to get to know what is working well and what isn't in order to identify those patterns. If a system changes, so will the individuals within the system. So you have to really partner with the family in order to do that, in my experience. There may be others who are able to do it a lot faster because they have some better knowledge of overall family systems, but I was coming from a school frame, working with children and working out, whereas some people are coming from a family frame and working in towards the kid. Right. So this integrative approach to helping process. Each theory, as we're summarizing, each theory has something unique to contribute to a counselor's style. It is possible to draw techniques from most of the contemporary theoretical models. Indeed, right? And developing an integrated perspective takes much study and clinical practice. So let me go over these three again and kind of break these down, right? So the style that a counselor may bring often is about their own experience, but it may also be for the population that they're working with. So I did not grow up in an impoverished situation. I came from the suburbs. However, my family, and I'm talking about my parents, aunts, and uncles, that older generation did. So I understood it from their perspective, but I also was working with people now who were living in a very similar situation. So their needs drove my techniques that I chose to use, not the other way around. But sometimes I think it's a challenge to figure it out when you first start. So it is possible to draw techniques from the most contemporary theoretical models. And I would say, especially when you're working with young people, these new techniques are driven by ideas and other things that are happening outside in society, and they drive you towards something that's more contemporary. So developing this integrated perspective, man, you got to be up in your game in order to have an integrated perspective and to know when to shift gears. But you also need to know when you're not versed enough in a certain area to continue to do that and make that referral. I think that's extremely important. So let me tell you a little bit about my approach. I was trained in ecosystemic psychology, which has some basis with family and environmental kind of looks, but that ecosystemic psychology informs how I do assessments and evaluations. I'm looking at context. So I'm looking at the ecosystem in which a child or family may find themselves in, right? Economics, culture, language, region. All these different facets go into some of the decisions and the hypothesis that I develop about what it's going to take to help this family. I also work in a positive psychology frame. I like to ask what's right with people rather than what's wrong. That's a part of my assessment too. And I like to highlight what's right and their ability to problem solve and overcome things. So for people who've been marginalized in society, their resilience being highlighted is sometimes even a boon to them and allows them to feel and here's what's more important, that they have a greater expectation that they can overcome this problem. Most people have somebody in their family who's overcome a similar type of problem. So if they feel closer to that family member, or they just think that somebody in my family can solve this problem, I have it within me too that I'm more likely to be able to solve this problem. So this brings me to an African-centered psychological approach that I apply to anybody that I work with, but I believe that family, as far as an African-centered life, is important. Going back several generations, coming forward generations, right? And taking time to understand where that person sees himself within that family and the power and the structure that that family can have for them is part of how I work. Not for every case, because again, I need to take an integrated perspective. But for me, that's how I work. So if you see my resume, which is online, ecosystemic, positive psychology, and African-centered psychological approaches are the three that I really take towards helping people strive towards meaning and hope within their lives. You hear a little bit of existentialism in there as well. All right. I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, of course, you know how to get in contact with me. Thanks. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. All right. Peace.